Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, Windows 10 is here. Intel and Micron's new CrossPoint might change everything you know about storage. Cheap GPU recos, Logitech's G29 racing wheel, and so much more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twitch.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 326, recorded July 30th, 2015. Windows 10 and CrossPoint change everything.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100 plus job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/twit.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware. Twitch's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most engaging, most entertaining, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, most baby-filled technology mood, news, stuff, questions. Brian, save me, man.
Babies. Don't you wish they'd sleep longer? I don't know. I don't really have a good segue into anything through that. Although it's very likely we'll see more about baby technology or baby computer hardware. I don't know if there's baby computers, but we'll see some of that pop up throughout the coming months at least. So I can already tell that I'm not going to be the parent that buys the like Leapfrog branded fake computer stuff for your kid. Like, you know, you go to the toy store and it's like, oh, it's like a laptop for kids. And you look at it, it's like, well, no.
It's a 20-character LED monitor and a really cheap. And it's funny, some of those toys, like a 2-year-old will engage with at a deeper level than they will with an iPad. That said, so much of what's targeted at children is crap.
Well, in my experience with those toys and like fake phones, like things that are supposed to try to emulate phones or tablets for like small kids, is they know immediately that they're not using the same thing you're using or that their older siblings are using. And they're like, yeah, no, I get it. Thanks. Give me the real thing instead. So I'm kind of just anticipating that. And it's like, look, I have plenty of tablets and stuff around here, so I don't think it'll be an issue. So
the trick is locking down the tablet so that your kid either isn't, you know, installing stuff or deleting stuff or erasing stuff, which is always, we could probably do a whole section on locking things down. However, a couple crazy stories today. First up, we should probably talk about Windows 10. We spent all day talking about it on Tech Thing this week, except when we were talking about the Moto X and the Moto G, which we'll get to in a minute. I think the biggest deal in terms of our podcast, above and beyond, you know, Windows 10 embraces the desktop. It brings back, you know, it's all about being compatible with all apps. It's all about, you know, interfacing with your computer however you want it to, kind of the best of Windows 7 and the best of Windows 8. Since there actually were some good things in Windows 8, mostly, I think, under the hood. Touchscreen friendly, mouse friendly, keyboard friendly. They don't really care how you use it, just as long as you use it. I think the biggest challenge, you know, DirectX 12 is here now officially. That said, there's not a whole lot you can do with DirectX 12 that shows DirectX 12's promise. The biggest thing, though, I think is for Windows Home users, you know, updates are mandatory, or were, because it wasn't just updates, it wasn't just security updates, it wasn't just Windows updates, it was hardware updates, which I got to talk to some folks from Microsoft a couple of weeks ago, and my immediate reaction was like, can I turn off hardware driver updates? And they were like, maybe in the future. And then literally like 24 hours before Windows 10 launches, there is this massive, I was just in the Tested podcast, which is really, really fun and really, really strange because they use naughty language in it. And so I can't say cluster bean, I'll say, since this is a child-friendly podcast. There's this cluster bean involving the NVIDIA drivers and the Windows 10 drivers for your NVIDIA GPUs fighting And the end result is a lot of unhappiness for NVIDIA users who are trying to run Windows 10. So, for people who, manage large amounts of hardware, this is one of the reasons why, Windows Enterprise has the ability to sort of, you get to choose the updates you deal with. But they actually have patched Windows 10 already with a tool that allows you to sort of turn off drivers that are crashing your machine. So it's been interesting. Obviously, like, I've been running Windows 10 on my primary desktop forever. I really like it. I think for a lot of people, it's funny because what I didn't realize until I was actually talking to Will and tested today is the way they're rolling out the software is the reason they're staging the release of it is not just because they're trying to get it on a billion machines, which is kind of a fantastic marketing number, but because they are looking at your machine, figuring out what's on it, and then if they know everything on your machine is compatible, then they're giving you the 3 GB download to install Windows 10. And if your machine has hardware with known issues, they are delaying until those repairs are made. So it's a fascinating release. It's a completely different way Microsoft has built this operating system. And it's a really big change for how Microsoft handles things in a lot of ways. I don't know. I like it a lot. I probably wouldn't do what I did, which was immediately installing it. I'm running it on my primary machine for months.
Right.
I'd probably ease my way into it. Although I will say, if you start using Windows 10, you'll probably find it impossible to use a Windows 8 machine. I don't know.
Yeah, I will have that same experience. Like I put yesterday, I put Windows 10 on my Dell XPS 13, so my primary working laptop, the one I use for everything. The upgrade process was very quick. It was very simple. No driver issues, no compatibility issues with software or anything yet. I've heard some people complain about, interestingly enough, like antivirus software being the one thing that when during upgrades, it's like, hey, you should probably uninstall this. And then it's like, well, that's kind of like the one piece of software I didn't want to uninstall ever. And even like the McAfee software is having some Windows 10 compatibility issues, I guess. But for me, it has all worked seamless. There's not like if you already use Windows 8.1 and you kind of jump into this, like for me, the immediate changes weren't dramatic. Like things looked a little bit different. I noticed sharper text on Google Chrome, for example. It seemed like, because I use DPI scaling, like, resolution scaling, if you will, on this because of the small screen size. And that seems to work a little bit better across most applications. Things look sharper and clearer. The UI for Windows looks perfectly fine. Start menu looks great. Everything seems to run as expected. It comes with Candy Crush Saga pre-installed. I don't know what anybody could have to complain about with this, but I don't anticipate using Cortana. I don't know if you've had that experience since you've had it on your machine for such a long time, but
I don't know. I think Cortana. I think a lot of the interesting things about Cortana, and the geofencing being a particular one. A lot of what's interesting about Cortana doesn't really happen until A, you give Cortana a lot of information, and B, much more importantly, the Cortana apps are running, on your Android or iOS phone. I don't think there's an iOS version yet, but the idea that you can be, stop, ask Cortana, remind me to pick up toilet paper next time I'm near Costco. I don't know how useful that is or how gimmicky that is. I think it's probably gimmicky in a lot of ways, but it has the ability, when you can ask, asking Cortana, how tall is Mount Everest is not a particularly big deal. Asking Cortana to find you, prices on flights between, Oakland and Las Vegas, and it pops up results, starts getting more interesting. I think Cortana is probably in some ways more advanced than Siri or asking Google. I think it's also in many ways very, very early in its development. I think it has a lot of potential. And it's also going to be interesting how much I ever talk to any computer, because it's such a bizarre way to interact with it.
I want it to work better than it does. I mean, the main reason I brought it up is like it kind of like dominates that lower corner of your taskbar. So like I said, I'm on a smallish 13-inch, laptop screen, and the Cortana Ask Me Anything section is probably a quarter of the taskbar, and so it's kind of like I'm already kind of debating is maybe I'll just see if there's a way to remove that from Windows 10 so I can just have more room for icons and pinned applications on the taskbar that I have down there. But otherwise, everything seems to have been going well. Like the notification center works well, the kind of easy way to access wireless settings, and everything seems to run really well. No complaints from me. Haven't done any like performance testing or anything. I don't expect there to be huge gaps. I have looked at things on the graphics side, and depending on the game and the resolution you're running at, you might see as much as 6, 7, 8% performance improvement in gaming in frame rate. And that's strictly due to the improved efficiency of the WDDM, like the driver model. It has nothing to do with DirectX necessarily, because we don't have any DirectX 12 games yet that we're taking advantage of. But the WDDM, just the driver model itself, is more efficient under DirectX 12. So DirectX 11 games and 10 and that stuff can in theory run a little bit better. Tends to happen more with lower resolutions, with less anti-aliasing enabled. Anything that basically takes a little bit more of the bottleneck away from the GPU specifically, and more on like the CPU and driver distribution side, is where you'll see some of the bigger advantages. But I think like one of the games that stood out, Dragon Age Inquisition had like 7 or 8% performance improvements, but something very demanding like Crysis 3, close to nothing. So just keep that in mind. I don't think gamers need to go out and upgrade to Windows 10 immediately on their gaming machines because of some kind of drastic performance change. But as we start to see, I think by the end of this year, we'll see a couple of DirectX 12 based games come out. I think Microsoft's Fable, the new Fable game that's going to come out on Xbox One and it'll come out on PC, will have DirectX 12 capability. But what that means, we don't really know yet. But I don't know. So far, so good.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a huge Windows 10 fan at this point, in part because every time I went between Windows 10 Technical Preview or Insider Preview and Windows 8, it just reminded me of everything I found frustrating about Windows 8. One thing you might want to be aware of, you should be aware of, we're talking about it on Tech Thing this week, is the Wi-Fi Sense. It does share your passkeys with your friends. Ars Technica has an interesting article where they suggest you should not be scared about it. It's basically this thing that came out from Windows Phone that evolved into Windows 10. But if you're, quote, Ars Technica, despite what you may have read elsewhere, you should not be mortally afraid of Wi-Fi Sense. By default, it will not share Wi-Fi passwords with anyone else. For every network you join, you'll be asked if you want to share it with your friends or social networks. So, we're kind of advising you turn it off. But it's an interesting... It's an interesting feature inside of Windows 10. There's a ton in there. And a big thing with Windows 10 is it's going to be learning how to teach you about all of the cool, random little things inside of the operating system that it wants you to explore. I mean, do you use Alt-Tab?
I do. I use Alt-Tab quite a lot. And I do like the Windows Tab option now that kind of brings you, what do they call that? The... I don't know, application viewer, where it's basically Alt-Tab, but it kind of holds up all the screens and that stuff.
Right. Well, part of what's funny about it is it turns out when Microsoft started, monitoring, and they basically referred to it as telemetry. They're doing a ton of telemetry and gathering data. So they've been watching everything I do on Windows 10, which is kind of frightening. They started to learn a lot more about how people actually use the operating system, and then when they introduced new features, if people found them and what they could do to help people find them and educate them about them, and that's been a big sort of discovery process for them. But they found out, for example, one of the stats that came out is 6% of Windows users use Alt-Tab. And they were like, we have to teach more people how to use this.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's interesting. The other thing that came out as part of the NVIDIA is you have the ability to block individual patches with the driver update or the software update from Windows 10. KB3073930 patch blocker. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how this evolves on the Windows 10 side of things. XPoint, bizarre announcement for the Windows 10 week. I thought partnership between Intel and Micron, and it's kind of funny, which is something I was trying so hard not to say today, just to change things up. Alan did the write-up for PCPro.com. 1,000 times faster than NAND. Man, it's kind of crazy. It's, memory progress has been so stable or boring, I think, for a while.
Yep.
Because I was so up to my eyeballs in Windows 10 this week, this didn't really sink in probably until today, but it's essentially, so XPoint technology, 1,000 times faster than NAND. And XPoint, which apparently I'm supposed to say CrossPoint,
yep.
Alan tells us, so thank you, Alan, is a new class of memory technology with some amazing characteristics: 10 times the density of DRAM, 1,000 times the speed, and 1,000 times the endurance compared to current NAND flash technology. So it's non-volatile. They're sampling parts now. It's going to probably show up in data servers in 2016, which means consumer use will be a while out past that. It's really interesting. It's just something that's going to essentially sit in between your main system memory and your storage, be fairly large volumes. Super cache, I've heard people call it, better than cache. Local storage. But the idea that especially for servers, they're going to need to store huge amounts of data incredibly quickly from all of these new data sources coming online, in the Internet of Things, for example. It's one of the use cases on this. Alan, add anything to that? Did you guys do the podcast last night?
Yeah, I mean, so this is meant to be that in between NAND and DRAM. It will eventually be kind of like a consumer-ish product, but it's still going to be pretty expensive. So if you think about, if you think of DRAM being about, what is it, $3 per gig or so? No, that's not right. Is it $30 per gig? I'm trying to think now where we're at in terms of actual DDR3 and DDR4 RAM. Versus NAND, which is like, I don't know, let's go down to 30 cents per gig on the low side. This is going to be somewhere between those, and then it has characteristics somewhere in between those as well. But all of those differences and changes really kind of make it a unique product, that it will have unique properties. One of the things Alan said last night was that Intel and Micron basically said this is a product that will determine the direction of how other products are developed, right? Things that weren't possible before, that you couldn't do before, will now be possible to be kind of created and invented and thought of using CrossPoint technology, right? So something that you're developing a processor, but man, what you'd really like to have is 3 gigs of cache on it or something like that, or for some particular workload that you couldn't really do before. We're kind of, 128 megs of cache is kind of the high level we're at with level 4 stuff on Broadwell Iris Pro graphics. And this will give you the opportunity to kind of create just totally new ideas and new technologies around what CrossPoint can do. I think from a consumer standpoint, people that watch this show or listen to it, the immediate thing is to think of, oh, this is going to be the next SSD I buy. This is going to be the next storage device I buy. And we're probably still a little bit away from that. That'll come to like the enterprise level first, as kind of like a generic, plop this into your system. You can access it through PCI Express or some other interface and take advantage of its speed and capabilities there. It's going to be a little while before we get some of that on the consumer side. I mean, it's speed and capability of, I think they're talking about, if you look at specification wise and you compare it to like your typical NAND flash numbers, you're looking at about 20 gigabytes per second read speed or write speeds and 200 gigabytes per second read speeds, which is awesome. but it's like we don't have a bus, like a standard bus that can do that, right? So even if we have 16 lanes of PCI Express Gen 3, we don't have that capability to do that, really.
It's a nice dream, though.
It is. So, I mean, we're talking more like direct connect to processors, right? If you look at the infographic on that story, you'll see that, they're really talking about XPoint technology communicating to a processor and thus transforming the memory hierarchy, right? Like it's imagine what, Microsoft did with the Xbox One, where they have this kind of EDRAM type stuff, similar to that, but on a larger scale, where you can just have capacities much larger than where we're at today. Yeah, or as they say here, fast, inexpensive, non-volatile memory technology can serve as system memory and storage. And it's also interesting. That's an interesting point, that it is both non-volatile and incredibly fast. So unlike DRAM, your memory sticks that you put in your computer, turn off the power, all that data is gone. In this case, it's slower than DRAM, but if you turn off the power, all that data is still there. So the benefits to an instant-on computer are there, right? Instant on, while actually totally powering the system off, not even having like a standby level power is now something that they think they'll be able to do, right? So you read it from this CrossPoint technology back into system memory, and that's how you start it up quickly, as opposed to having to load it off of, of an SSD through the SATA bus or something like that. And again, that's just going to increase speeds and user experiences, I think, in some pretty dramatic ways. And what I think is cool about this is that it's not a 10-year off technology. This is like a 1 to 2 year off technology before we start to see some interesting implementations of it.
It's exciting. I'm curious to see if it comes online as quick as they do. And I think given Micron and Intel working on this, it should. I hope it comes online quickly. I'm kind of curious to see where it goes and where it takes us, because anytime you can access more data faster is of great interest, and not just if you're the NSA. Fantastic deal on the Android phone. The new Motorola Moto G went on sale this week. I'm going to kind of start from the low end and work my way up to the high end. $179.99. 13 megapixel camera, waterproof coated, so it's waterproof to a meter, like a 5-inch 1080p screen. The memory options aren't fantastic because they sort of artificially cap the Moto G with a 32 gigabyte micro SD card slot. And there's not a huge amount of memory. It's interesting that for this affordable phone, they put it in the Moto Maker, so you can pick the front color, the back color, accent colors, engrave it. There is an 8 gigabyte, so it's 8 gigabytes for $180, which I think would be unusable and is not a particularly great idea. I do recommend that you go with the 16 gigabyte version of the phone, which is $40 extra. That also comes with 2 gigabyte of RAM. But it fixes it's 4G LTE. It has a micro SD card slot, so it fixes all of the issues with some of the previous versions of the Moto G. Well, because for a while they didn't have 4G LTE data. For another version, they didn't have the micro SD card slot. So this kind of puts everything together and solves the one issue I had with the Moto G I carried for months, which was the atrocious camera. So it should pick that up. Motorola is also kind of obsessed with megapixel numbers, because for the Moto X Pure Edition, which I think is the Moto X style in everywhere but the United States, they did a 21 megapixel camera, which is kind of ridiculous. But with Android Lollipop should give you decent, if they chose a decent sensor, there's no reason they wouldn't have, should give you excellent photographic performance. $399.99. They're claiming that it is a worldwide phone, including Verizon CDMA. Out of the box, which I think is a big deal. Snapdragon 808, 1.8 gigahertz Qualcomm processor, Adreno 418 GPU, a natural language processor, a contextual computing processor, which I have no idea what it does. Something I think is great, which is 3 gigabytes of DDR. They use 16, 32, 64 gigabyte versions of the phone. The micro SD card slot in the Moto X supports up to 128 gigabyte cards. So it's looking like a pretty fantastic deal, like a 3,500 milliamp hour battery, which is awesome. The screen's Quad HD, Gorilla Glass 3. again, the water repellent nano coating. So it looks like a pretty fantastic phone, as long as it's got a decent sensor in that camera. And it's essentially, a flagship phone for $400, which I also think, given the sluggish sales on the Galaxy S6, is a really good idea. Then they came out with a third phone that sits in between the Moto G and the Moto X Pure Edition, all of these, by the way, run pure Android, which is the Moto X Play, which is going to be around $299, but they do not have a ship date on that. So Moto X this fall, Moto G available now, Moto Play eventually will eventually be available. But if you're looking for an inexpensive Android phone, I would put that Moto G on your short list. I really, really like it.
I'm a big fan of this continuing trend of flagship phones that aren't $700.
Yeah,
like flagship capable phones that aren't $700. So I want to see that stuff continue. So,
given the outrageous pile of money I paid for my iPhone 6, yes.
Yeah, right. And that's like we've become used to that, and I don't think it's necessary going forward, right? I think we've hit a point in phone technologies where it's okay for prices to start coming down because of the capabilities where we're at. Yep. I don't think we should not have any $700 phones, because I think we need to push things forward. Just like I think $1,000 graphics cards are okay, but I want to make sure, whatever I'm trying to say.
$700 phone should be really badass and represent a pretty fantastic leap over what you can buy for considerably less money, and that has not always been the case with cell phones in the last couple of years.
Thank you.
You have a 4K monitor at $650. What do you do? Ladies and gentlemen, I ask this question of Mr. GPU himself, Mr. Ryan Shrout.
If you have a 4K monitor and you have $650, I assume that you're trying to buy a video card of some kind with this. Yeah. You're really down to the Fury X or the GTX 980 Ti. The Titan X is outside of that $650 mark. Although I guess this was a hard OCP story that they posted. They did include the Titan X in there, and I'm going to guess that the Titan X results are pretty darn close to the 980 Ti, and don't really validate the additional $350 or so you'll have to spend to get one of those. This comes down to a lot of things. I believe that the 4 gigs of memory versus 6 gigs of memory, the Fury X kind of being limited to 4 gigs because of their implementation of HBM, and the 980 Ti having 6 gigs of memory, gives me, I tend to lean towards the 980 Ti, even though I understand that the memory bandwidth provided by HBM is significantly higher than anything else we have seen on the market. I think there's some other complications with the Fury X, including the somewhat low ROP count, raster operator count of the GPU that kind of affects its performance when you start to enable anti-aliasing, which is still useful at 4K, despite what some people may want to believe. So for me, being that I am a fan of things like G-Sync over FreeSync and some of the GeForce experience and the way that software works and their driver updates, I would probably lean towards the 980 Ti. But the Fury X is still a really good card if you can find it. I'm trying to look now to see if we had done a stock check recently on the AMD Fury X, see if they had actually cleaned up some of those. And the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean,
so you still can't really find a Fury X. So I guess the answer is a 980 Ti by default.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things that the article points out on Hard ICP is that, even $1,000 Titan X is not going to allow you to do the highest settings at 4K. I mean, the kind of the primary takeaway from this is that if you want a 4K game and have the highest quality on 4K, in 4K gaming on your 4K monitor, which presumably you do if you spent the money for a 4K monitor, you're going to be spending, $1,300, $1,400, $1,500 on GPUs, probably something in the neighborhood of, $1,000 to $1,300. And it's, they also point out that high bandwidth memory is a cool stepping stone, but it's not solving a lot of the other issues on the platform. And the bottom line, quote, let's be honest, the AMD Radeon R9 Fury X is getting its butt kicked at 4K. Not that the 980 Ti is doing anything particularly fantastic, But acceptable, yes. But for fantastic 4K gaming, you need to run multiple GPUs.
Yep.
So, Gigabyte X99 system build. Win a full Core i7 5960X PC. One of you will have to do it. I believe I am exempted from the opportunity to win this because of my existing relationship with PC Per.
I think that sounds fair.
Fine. Tell me about the awesomeness that someone else can win.
So we worked with Gigabyte to do like a system build here right before the Windows 10 release. Now it's after Windows 10 release, but kind of a really high-end enthusiast PC, right? So we've got the $1,000 Core i7 5960X processor. We have a $310 Gigabyte X99 gaming 5P board, 32 gigs of RAM, a 480 gig SSD, a pair of GTX 960s and SLI, an 850 watt power supply, water cooler, Thermaltake case. So we worked with Gigabyte, Thermaltake, and Kingston, and it's about retail price on Amazon is $2,639 for all this stuff. And obviously that's a lot, but some people are building systems like this still. If you're looking for slight modifications, if you're trying to build your own machine at this point, it's end of summer, things are, maybe you've worked all summer to earn this money to build this PC. I might recommend maybe not getting the 5960X, backing down one to the 5930, saving a few $100s there. You might also be somebody who wants to, rather than go with a pair of GTX 960s in SLI, go with a single higher performance card like a 980 or a 980 Ti to get a little bit more consistent performance out of it. But this is the hardware that they sent us to do this system build. And the best part is obviously that we're going to give that complete system away. Case, power supply, cooler, SSD, memory, graphics cards, processor, motherboard, all that kind of put together here and tested here. So you can do that. If you go to PCPer.com and you look for the post that says Gigabyte X99 system build, you will find the entry methods inside that one-page story there. And it involves things like following us on Twitter and subscribing to us on YouTube, the normal types of things that you do to enter contests. So you've got 12 days left to do that. So you got plenty of time, but it is a pretty killer prize to sign up for. So
more killer prizes. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor of this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware, ZipRecruiter. Business owners, did you know that summer is a great time to hire the best people? With competitors on vacation, there's less competition for quality candidates. Posting jobs in one place, though, it's just not enough to find quality candidates, and short staffing leaves little time to post to dozens of job sites. Thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites with one single click and be instantly matched to candidates from over 4 million resumes. Just post once, and within 24 hours, watch your candidates roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. ZipRecruiter has been used by, brace yourselves, people, over 400,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Look, getting the right people for your company is so important. Melinda, a happy ZipRecruiter client, said, quote, "We have received several highly qualified candidates from ZipRecruiter. So happy our company signed up with them. We are excited to see what comes next. Thank you so much for your customer helpline. Also, it's so very helpful." You, ladies and gentlemen, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. Go to ZipRecruiter.com/twit. That's ZipRecruiter.com/twit. And we want to thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Computer Hardware. And if I slide my monitor down a little bit, you'll actually be able to see my face. Yeah, ZipRecruiter.com/twit. Go check it out if you are looking for better employees to staff your organization. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, it's it's just been such an odd week. Super memory, Windows 10, NVIDIA crashing Windows 10. And now Musk, Hawking, Wozniak, and so many others have called for a ban on autonomous weapons and military AI. So my first obnoxious reaction to this, because apparently I'm just becoming more and more evil the longer I've been a father. This is a warning, I think, for Ryan. Basically, this is very similar to some of the stuff that happened with nuclear proliferation back in the 20th century. But basically, smart people say this is probably a bad idea. And there's a a grounding on this in that the United States Navy is working on autonomous drones. The Air Force drones are all wirelessly linked because, we could run wires to drones in Afghanistan, wirelessly linked to pilots who actually physically operate the drones and make the decisions. Ars Technica has a great write-up on it. Quote, a very large number of scientific and technological luminaries have signed an open letter calling for the world's governments to ban the development of, quote, offensive autonomous weapons, end quote, to prevent a, quote, military AI arms race. So this letter is going to be presented at the International Joint Conferences on Artificial Intelligence in Buenos Aires, signed by Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Noam Chomsky, the Woz, and dozens of other AI and robotics researchers. One of the main arguments from the letter that Ars Technica quotes, the key question for humanity today is whether to start a global AI arms race or to prevent it from starting. If any major military power pushes ahead with AI weapon development, a global arms race is virtually inevitable, and the endpoint of this technological trajectory is obvious. Autonomous weapons will become the Kalashnikovs of tomorrow, or Skynet, or the Terminator. It is pretty intense when you start to think about it, because the only thing more frightening than, say, chemical warfare is chemical warfare from an autonomous device that could be hacked or just left on somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, just today I found out that my Chevy Volt could be hacked through OnStar, so that's pretty cool.
Oh, by the way, if you have a Chrysler automobile, the Chrysler wireless hack, which apparently Chrysler was warned about 5 years ago, but that was demonstrated so brilliantly in a YouTube video with a Wired author a couple weeks ago, a full recall has been issued for the firmware patch for that, which is one more reason I love my 1995 diesel truck. There's nothing to hack. But it's an interesting article on Ars Technica. And I for one I'm a little worried about embracing the Skynet future if it's not necessary. Best name for a monitor ever after Cat Leap, the Wasabi Mango UHD 420 monitor with FreeSync. I think more hardware should be named like anime. From the people that brought you Cowboy Bebop, Wasabi Mango.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about the naming scheme of it.
I think it's great. Embrace it.
It is. It's very Korean sounding, right? It has a very Korean looking logo. It's like a Astro Boy type character on the back of it. It's an odd duck. It's an interesting product though. This is a 42-inch monitor. I think some places are advertising it as a TV. At this point, I don't really know what the difference is. It doesn't have a tuner. So there's no coax input. Right. You have 4 HDMI, 1 DisplayPort, 1 VGA input on it, as well as a USB 3.0 hub. So to me, that says monitor, but you could use it for both. I don't really care. You could hook your DirecTV box up to it. It's going to do the same thing. It comes with a remote. The remote's all in Korean, except for the numbers. Those are universal. But you'll have to figure out like where the menu button is and kind of memorize that stuff if you need to do that. What's interesting is, so it's a 42-inch 4K 60 hertz monitor that also has HDMI 2.0 support, full 444 HDMI 2.0 support based on our testing. This is under $800, $796 on Amazon, shipped from Seoul, Korea. It arrived here in 3 days. And a couple of weeks ago, they released a firmware that adds FreeSync support to it.
Nice.
Which is what originally kind of brought it to our attention, that we're like, okay, let's get one of these in and see what it does. So a couple of things. One, I keep looking over the side because the monitor's there, but you guys can't see it, so I'll try to stop doing that. The FreeSync implementation is fairly limited. Its maximum refresh rate is 60 hertz, as you would expect with a 4K display, but the minimum variable refresh is 42 hertz. So you only get the variable refresh capability and frame rates between 42 and 60. When you go below 42 frames per second, you will adhere to whatever the VSync enabled setting happens to be on or off. So you either get screen tearing on it, or you'll get some stutter, judder, or whatever based on what the frame rate is and the refresh rate and how they correspond. So you still have to worry about VSync issues once you cross 42 frames per second and go under that. Now, For 4K gaming, since we were just talking about like what GPU do you have that can do 4K gaming, it's an interesting debate, right? Because my premise has been that at this point, 60 hertz maximum refresh G-Sync based 4K monitors are actually pretty good ideas, because the chances of you being able to maintain 60 frames per second at 4K is fairly limited. So being able to have a variable refresh monitor that can go down into the 50s, 40s, 30s, maybe even 20s if you get real desperate, is very beneficial in terms of just kind of trying to improve that experience. What I look at from this standpoint, this Wasabi Mango UHD 420 monitor is, if you're able to disable enough settings, turn down image quality, run multi-GPU, 2 Fury X's, 2 980 Ti's, something like that, where you're targeting 60 frames per second, even on 4K, then what the FreeSync implementation does on this, if you have AMD hardware, is it gives you a buffer zone, right? So if you're targeting 60, but at one point in GTA 5 it drops down to 50, you aren't going to have a poor gaming experience because of it. You're going to be able to have like a smooth, consistent frame rate as you go down there, and it even covered down into the 40s for the most part. But it's a bad idea to try to target specifically 42 to 60, because that 18 hertz, 18 frame per second window is going to be really, 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 really tough to find in your games, right? With settings or anything like that. So I see the FreeSync implementation this interesting for a couple of reasons. One is it's upgradable, which is something we hadn't actually experienced before. It was a monitor that when we got it did not have FreeSync support. We did a firmware update to it from their website, which calls it pre-sync in the translation from Korean to English. But we do that firmware update, it adds FreeSync in the OSD, it shows up in the driver, and now we have that capability. So that's one reason it's interesting. And also it's kind of interesting to think of it in a different way of, okay, we have this very limited range. So what's the best use of that limited variable refresh range? And that would be as a kind of buffer. Now, ideally, if this were a G-Sync monitor that had a G-Sync module in it, you would have the capability of going below 42 frames per second with your variable refresh. You could go down to 30, you could go down to 20, you could go down to 10 if you really wanted to for some sick reason. But with FreeSync, we don't have that capability. In my
video games.
Yeah, I want to make it as difficult as possible to play any of this. But it would be better if it were a G-Sync implementation. But it's still better than if this were just a fixed refresh 60 hertz monitor, right? So, and I think it's a compelling solution for, again, under $800 for the size you get, the resolution, the image quality is good. It's an IPS screen. So great viewing angles, no light bleed on the sides. Like, I've been pretty impressed with just the usability of it in general. And then the addition of FreeSync kind of makes it just a little bit better in that regard for people that are AMD users.
What's the price on that monitor again?
$796 shipped from Korea. So
still a little bit more than I want to pay, but still a fantastic price for a 4K monitor.
Yeah, if you look at a few weeks ago, we were talking about a $999 Seiki 40-inch 4K TV / monitor that does not have any variable refresh capability. So this is a little bit bigger. It's probably a little bit better screen.
Right.
And this
is a significant reduction in price.
It's definitely lower in price. Now, keep in mind, it's like for support and all that, like there's no U.S. division of Wasabi Mango. This is a Korean monitor sold through an independent person on Amazon or eBay or wherever you get it. This is very similar to when we saw the rash of
the early cat leaps.
Yeah, like cat leaps and Yamakazes and those monitors that were 25 by 14 that, you know, for cheap that you couldn't get before. This is the same idea, just brought to larger panels and larger resolutions.
I'm excited. I really miss having a 4K desktop, even, you know, though I can't afford to actually feed it pixels, especially with Windows 10. Like, you know, Windows 10 does a split screen 4-way now, which is a big plus. I don't know. Cat Leap and Wasabi Mango. Even less likely than a anime named monitor on PC Per is a racing wheel review. However, with Alan Mavantano's relocation to the mothership in Kentucky, and him possibly being an even bigger gearhead than I am, which is kind of frightening to contemplate.
Yeah.
There has been a review of Logitech's G29 Driving Force Racing Wheel, or Racing Wheel, as people will say it if they do not substitute W's for R's. Build quality looks good. You know, spring rates and travel differ for all three of the pedals. It's got sort of the ability to dig into your carpet. We find, quote, a few rubber feet, 6-threaded M6x1 holes for mounting to a racing chair setup, and a spring-loaded section of plastic spikes that can be extended to dig it into the carpet so you can aggressively bank. Clamps, more 6x1, M6x1 screw mounting holes on the wheel, some nice cable management. You know, I got to ask, it's a good-looking piece of hardware. Did Mr. Malventano enjoy driving with it? Was it realistic? Was it delightful? Did he cackle with joy? Because it's ridiculously, if you go to page 2 of the review, the configuration on the buttons and stuff, because it's essentially got an entire game controller built into the steering wheel. Yep. It's a frightening amount of customization is available on that.
Yeah, I think there's 24, 25 buttons, I want to say. And obviously, like this version of the wheel is for PC and PlayStation 4. The PlayStation 4 doesn't have 25 buttons on it, on its controller. Right. But this is all super easily mapped through the software, right? Which is great. So you can have the buttons do whatever you want. The wheel has a dial on it. If you look at it, that red dial in the right-hand corner of it, kind of right of center, it's just a dial that turns left or right, and you can make that into anything you want, right? You can have it every time you rotate it, it pushes a button so you can cycle through things. It's got a center button for select. You know, even the PlayStation button can be remapped if you want to do that. But I would say, yeah, overall, Alan really liked the wheel. It's really nice build quality. It's got helical, what was it? Helical gearing on it.
Right.
Helical. So you can get some higher end kits that use belts to drive the force feedback.
The Fanatec. I was going to say that there's a really nice, Alan does a really good job of comparing it to 3 or 4 of the other wheels that are out there. One's from Thrustmaster, the Fanatec, which is like $600 for the wheelbase, $300 for the pedal set. That's one of the belt-driven ones that gives you the incredible feedback.
Yeah, and this one actually does give you fantastic feedback. You just, every once in a while, you can feel the gear, like the transition between gears, right? So with a belt-driven one, it's just super smooth. You never feel the change in force being applied to it, or any kind of change in it that you're not supposed to feel. But it actually worked really well still. You know, if you're somebody who has never, if you're into racing games and you've used a controller for your whole life, you owe it to yourself to try a good wheel. I'm not even necessarily saying 100% has to be this one, but a good wheel, because it dramatically changes the experience of playing Project Cars or Dirt Rally or something like that. The pedals are great. They had different tension systems set up for gas, brake, and clutch. It does not come with the shift knob, which is a disappointment based on the price.
Yeah,
sorry,
well, it's like $150. This is a $299 set, I think.
$399.
$399
set. Yeah,
which is $150 more than the G27, which included a shifter. But I suspect a lot of it's so many people do paddle shifting on the racing games. They're really serious people who sit and do laps and pretend they're training for Formula One. All in all, though, I think Alan was surprised at how much he enjoyed the experience.
I think he was. I think he was as well. And my time with it was pretty good. Was pretty good too. I don't play nearly as many racing games as he does or as Josh does, but it's something that made it like, this is a totally different thing than I was used to. I was used to like, I'm going to benchmark this racing game. I'm going to use WASD to drive it, or I'm going to use this Xbox One controller to drive it. And it's just, I could see how people become addicted to racing games once you have a good wheel, good pedal setup, and you have everything mapped out the way it is. It's a much more immersive experience.
Yeah.
And you know, now I'm sitting here and like Alan he was testing it on his desk and he has a 40-inch Seiki TV. I keep saying TV, that 40-inch Seiki monitor in front of him. I'm thinking about setting up this 42-inch Wasabi Mango on mine with the wheel and see. You're talking about it, this as close as you are to it, this kind of huge image portal that you were looking into that almost kind of has no edges anymore. It could fundamentally help change that kind of driving experience too. So
it's pretty badass. If you haven't, if you haven't had a chance to game in an environment where you have a wheel and a big monitor or a series of monitors, it's pretty compelling. Questions. We've been promising questions. We have some. At the Tulsanator says, at Ryan Trout, at Patrick Norton, Windows 10 clean installer upgrade. Just finished an upgrade myself. Seems to be running pretty well. I always say do a clean install when you can. That said, the Windows 10 upgrade seems to be working extremely well for everybody I know who's been through it so far. Your mileage, of course, may vary. Aldraku says, do you guys believe that DirectX 12 may help AMD a bit on the problem with their GPU drivers? Question, and a couple of cat ears, if I'm reading that emoticon correctly.
I don't know exactly what that emoticon is supposed to be. I don't think necessarily it will change anything, right? Because through the rest of this year, through 2016, and maybe even to 2017, the majority of games that come out are still going to be based on DirectX 11, and so you're still going to be dependent on AMD and NVIDIA to develop high-quality DX11 drivers. What DX12 can do is for game developers that choose to take that on, or engine developers that choose to take that on, they can take some of that control away from the driver, which would, in theory, make things a little bit easier for AMD and NVIDIA on the development side. But I think the number of those developers are fairly limited. DX12 is still going to have the capability to, you know, say, run the same way as DirectX 11 does now in terms of, hey, you know, we're going to make it really easy for developers. Okay, now it's kind of on DirectX 12 and the driver teams at NVIDIA and AMD to kind of translate all this and make it happen. So, no, I don't think that DX12 is going to help AMD with any problems they have with their GPU drivers, at least not for a couple of years.
That's, yeah. And DirectX 12 isn't going to help, I don't know, most people for a long time.
Agreed.
Not to sound all sophisticated in my analysis, Scott Vieiro says, what video cards do you recommend for $200 or less for rare gaming, but Lightroom, Photoshop, or dual monitors?
I mean, the rare gaming part would tell me like basically anything, but he doesn't tell me what the rare gaming is. If the rare gaming is something kind of modern, then you want to get as close to that $200 price point as you can. The GTX 960 is a good choice for that. You can find GTX 960s for overclocked even at $199 these days. And I want to say is it the 390? No, the 390 is like $300 and something dollars. Maybe it's a 380 that you can find for $219 or so, a little bit less than that after rebate. Yeah, here's a MSI R9 380 for $199. Both of those options will be able to do anything you want to do in those productivity applications perfectly fine. No issues at all. I mean,
one rule of thumb is if you're looking for something, you know, if you're looking for something like Photoshop, where there are cases, or Premiere, where there are cases where you can accelerate things with a decent GPU, a good rule of thumb is all of the CUDA cores you can get for the least amount of money you can spend.
Right.
Unfortunately, there's just not much between the 750 Ti and the 780 Ti at this point in terms of new cards.
Right.
Which is unfortunate.
Yep.
770, 780, yeah. Stuff gets expensive quick, man.
It does. It does.
We had another interesting Twitter question. While we're talking about it, Raggy34 says, which less than $100 CPU do you recommend? I will say, if you can, save up your money and get a 750 Ti if you're gaming. If you're just doing something for, you know, like a home theater PC or something in the neighborhood of a GTX 680, probably. There's some smaller versions of that, or a GTX 660. Do they still make that? Where did it go? GTX 740 or 730. Sorry, I'm like looking at these little tiny, you know, when you're on the NVIDIA page and like there's all these huge GPUs and all of a sudden there's these super tiny, you know, I don't think I've ever seen a 720 or a 730 in the wild, which makes me wonder what they cost. Yeah. PMY GeForce GT 720, 1 gigabyte DDR3 graphics card, $49. You know, if you just need something, if you're not gaming, if you're gaming, I wouldn't go below a 750 Ti. No, GeForce GT 730. That's still rocking 1 gigabyte of RAM. Oh my goodness. At Ryan Trout, at Patrick Norton, thoughts on the recently announced EKWB all-in-one system. And I dropped this in there just because I had forgotten that EKWB was still making water blocks. And amongst other things, they did recently, at the beginning of July, a Radeon R9 Fury X full cover water block, which apparently will fit it into a single slot, GPU slot.
Yep.
But I was looking around and I could not find anything other than radiators that were new on their website.
Yeah, so I put another link in there just above the other one. That's a twitter.com. It's actually to EK Water Blocks thing. And so what they've announced is the EK Predator, but they basically just showed this picture today, and it's an all-in-one cooling solution. They call it the most powerful all-in-one liquid cooling solution. Retweet if you want to know more about it. And I don't know, literally that's the only thing that has come out about it is this rather cool-looking image. No, it's not on that page. If I just put a new one in, that's actually a Twitter image link, but it just looks like it's going to be thicker, have better fans, maybe better pump. EK is known for their water cooling stuff, so it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, that's the one right there. That maybe they come into the field and do something really unique. So
that would be nice.
It looks
just
neat,
because
looks different.
Well, it would neat and different would be delightful because
it looks like that port on the bottom there on the left hand side is like an expansion port. Maybe add other components into it.
I just like the fact that they use blood red coolant on the demo system on the homepage of the EKWB.com website because it's very distinctive and it's not green and glowing. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you, as always, for listening to this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. For more Ryan Trout, you can go to @RyanTrout or PCPro.com. For more Patrick Norton, you can go to @PatrickNorton or TechThing.com. And we also revived Possibly Unsafe recently. Michael Hand and I, we put vintage, we put new capacitors in a vintage speaker to restore its high-end performance. So that was fun, actually.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, Sonic caps, man. Capacitors, I had no idea that capacitors actually degrade in performance over time. So
I did not know that either.
See? It's exciting.
Learning all the time.
That's what we try to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Trout.
We'll see you next week on Twitch.